Um, well, I have your books here. Nobody has joined us yet. It's just us for a couple of moments,
Okay.
and that's okay. So we can chat. But I have, if
Oh, that
anybody
one
is,
too. Yeah.
if anybody is popping in before we get into the real meat of this, I'm going to hold up the books because these are the books we're here to talk about. First of all, there's Naked Addiction, which is considered a prequel, and then there's Hooked,
Yay.
and I got a final copy of
Oh,
Hooked,
good. Good.
but I still have just the arc of
Yeah.
Staged. So Hooked is available now. Naked Addiction has been available for a few years, and Staged is coming out on the 16th.
Right.
And these are Thomas and Mercer, right?
Right.
Yep. So
So I
we
can't get
get
them into most bookstores because
right.
because bookstores consider Amazon imprints to be either competition or the evil empire that ate their babies. And I was just told that again last night by another bookstore manager.
I didn't know Thomas and Mercer was an Amazon imprint.
And I told the guy, I go, even though I'm a local author, he goes, uh-huh. I go, you know, they have some really big names at Thomas and Mercer. He goes, yeah,
Yeah.
can't do it. Can't do it. And that was
They
it.
have some huge names. I read a lot of Thomas and Mercer books. I'm shocked.
Barnes and Noble won't carry them.
No. So you have to be in independent bookstores? Is that the deal?
Well, with Barnes and Noble, I asked them to try, and they said they tried, but the way their ordering system is set up, I was told that they just couldn't do it. But I think the bottom line is Barnes and Noble doesn't want to allow it. So, because it's a competitor, I mean, Barnes and Noble has its own online bookstore, and they don't want to compete with Amazon.
Okay, I get
So
that part.
the only way that people can buy, you can actually order one book from Barnes and Noble if you go
Right.
in there and order it. And
Yeah.
it'll take a little while, I guess. And I don't know how long, but that is possible. But they cannot order more than one for one customer. They won't order in to put them in stock on the shelves.
So, okay, so where can people buy these books then? Obviously Amazon
Amazon, that's it.
or directly from you.
Directly from me. And if you happen to get lucky and see me doing it on consignment at Barnes and Noble, where they take most of the money and I get this little bit, I am doing a book signing at Bay Books, which doesn't have a problem ordering it for me. They are an independent bookstore, and we're doing a book signing on June 20th. That's in Coronado, where the Rebecca 𝐂𝐚𝐢 case happened. And so my Rebecca 𝐂𝐚𝐢 book is one of their top selling books like ever. And so they are very nice to me. So
I am just stunned. I did not know this.
yeah, and it's kind of frustrating because and I was even told last night that the San Diego public library system, they just don't want to carry it for the same, because they just don't want to support them. And then they also don't want anybody selling books in the libraries when they do their own talks, except for the library bookshop, which is run by the San Diego Public Library Foundation. Although he said that there are many branch managers that kind of just go ahead and do it anyway, but they're not supposed to. And so I have an event coming up on June 23rd at the La Jolla Library with a panel discussion with Matt Coyle and Mark Carlos. We're 3 local crime authors. And then I have my book launch party at Piatti Restaurant. So bookstores are kind of out. And now most libraries, apparently, according to him anyway, at least San Diego public libraries, I can go to, smaller town libraries that don't have that rule, but it's pretty difficult to promote these books. So it's all online. So people like you're my outlets, talk about the book, and that's all I can, and then they can order it from Amazon. That's pretty much how.
I'm just flabbergasted. I just had no idea. Wow. I just did an author chat. God, I have to go back and look.
Well, they told me, they said, if you are the kind of author who wants to have a big stack of books at Barnes & Noble, we are not the publisher for you. They told me that too. So they're, they say we don't see that bookstore events move the needle. So my promotions are online mostly because that's where the books are selling.
Wow, that explains why I see you on Facebook doing signings, all that, because you've really got to get out there and hustle.
Well, when I do a consignment, I did 2 for Hooked. I did them at Barnes & Noble. They also ordered my back titles, which are true crime, which they do carry. Okay. So I was there to sell their books as well. So they made out pretty well.
Okay, I see. All right.
And I may do that. I may do 1 or 2 of those for staged, but I don't have any on the books right now because, frankly, after having 4 books in 15 months, you hit a saturation point. I'm tired of talking about myself, but I think people are also tired of hearing about it. I mean, that's pretty unusual to have that many books come out in such a short time.
Oh, yeah. Because a lot of the authors that I read, I'm lucky to get a book from them once a year.
And that's more normal. But I mean, I couldn't control this. This is just how it happened because it was 2 different publishers. I had 2 books with one publisher and then these 2 books with Thomas and Mercer. And I'm not complaining. It's just difficult to promote them. And these are some of the reasons. So I appreciate that we're doing this today, and I hope there are some people. What time is it? Are we even on yet?
I was just going to say, it's about 12 o'clock, so we should really get to the formal introduction. Okay. And I will tell you what, most of these videos end up being watched later because a lot of people are working and they don't watch live, but then I get views later on.
If you want to go over what we just talked about, because people might not know that, we can at least mention it.
Yeah, we can do that. But let's start at the beginning, and let me introduce you.
Okay.
I've been reading your books I went back and looked, I think it's about 16 years.
That's great.
Maybe more. And I started with Dead Reckoning.
Okay.
And that was it. That sold me. So for those of you watching, Ｃaitlin Rother has joined me graciously today, and she has had a fabulous career as an investigative reporter and journalist. And then she began writing. Now, I learned something. She's going to talk about it with us. Your first book was actually fiction, which I didn't realize until a few months ago. And then she began writing true crime. And that's where I found her, was as a true crime writer. And as I just mentioned, if you want to start reading her true crime books, go back and read Dead Reckoning. I'm telling you, you will be up all night. I got involved in reading that book for one simple reason. I was doing it with a book tour group. And when I read the synopsis, I said, I have to go read this book because it had a tie into my profession. Right. Because the main character, if you will, in the book, Skylar De Leon, by the time I was reading the book, was living on the death row at San Quentin State Prison, which was where I hung out professionally. So when things would come up and there'd be a connection, I'd be like, oh, it's the cue. I have to read this. And I couldn't put the book down. It was just so fascinating about how he committed this horrendous crime. And he ended up being condemned and was living there. But the thing that really struck me with my civil rights background was the motive for his crime was gender confirmation surgery, which he couldn't afford. And fast forward, which he has since gotten, or she, I should say, has since gotten.
Now, I have not been able to confirm that with her because she refused. She played all coy. I got her to do a little email with me, and then she blocked me.
Okay, I thought she had it.
Well, I don't know. I mean, there was a whole thing right towards the end of the presidential election when the Trump campaign was trying to make Kamala Harris look like that she was, had this history of helping transgender people get taxpayer subsidized surgery. And there was like one little tiny fragment of truth in there somewhere, but it really wasn't like she was really pushing for it because she wasn't really involved. I think her administration, this happened with a judge and then the CDC took it over. Anyway, but in the course of that, there was an article where somebody who I believe was posing as a journalist wrote Skylar in prison, and there was a letter that she supposedly wrote back saying that she had the surgery, but I have never been able to confirm whether that was actually from her. Now, I have seen her letters written, and I had them for research for my book, and she couldn't spell to save her life. She and I talked about this, and she said she couldn't even read a book, so she had problems reading. I think she might have had dyslexia or some kind of reading disability. And so I couldn't really confirm that this letter was from her, but I think it sounded enough like her that I believed it. So I think she has gotten the surgery, but the only way to confirm that is if she ends up in a women's prison. And I haven't checked recently, but my sources say that she did get it, but they couldn't confirm either. And last I looked, she was still at San Quentin, probably because she was in the psychiatric facility, which is at San Quentin.
I was just going to say she was in the pit,
for her own safety. So
right.
I still can't confirm to this day whether or not she got the surgery, but I think she probably did. And she just wouldn't confirm. She's like, I said, so you got the surgery? She's like, who told you that? She's like, she wouldn't ever say yes or no. That's how she is.
Now that you mentioned it, I do remember seeing that letter. Maybe you posted it, or I remember the letter.
I wrote something about it, but I mean, I haven't updated my book because I haven't been able to confirm that.
Okay. And I will tell you, I know for a fact what motivated CDCR to start offering these services, these medical services to inmates. And it's very simple. 2 words, the courts.
Right.
And the reason I know that is because I was on the transgender work group.
Right.
Which was where we were discussing with all disciplines in a room how to respond to the court's rulings.
The CDC wanted to make the decision, not the courts.
Well,
right.
The issue was the courts were saying that it was mandated that this medical care be provided, but the issue then became, and you brought it up, housing. Because we did some visits to prisons and we spoke with transgender inmates, and it was interesting to me to find out that many of the transgender inmates don't want to change facilities.
Oh, really? Because that's all Skylar wanted. But that before she was even went to San Quentin, she was telling me she wanted to be in a female prison.
Yeah,
because
but some of them don't.
Well, and then the inmates so if you're a transgender woman, you were a man at birth and you transition, the female inmates don't feel safe, right? A lot of times when those people transfer in. And so it's not like it's an easy thing to administer.
It's not easy. And let me tell you that without breaching confidentiality, there's a lot of discussion that has to go on in the prison systems,
right? Because
classification issues, what crime are they committed, for, and do they pose a danger to other inmates?
Right.
Can they program? And then let me tell you another issue that comes up is searches. And that's a whole other ballgame we don't need to get into. But I mean, this is a complicated area. So yeah, last I heard she was at San Quentin. But anyway, I don't have any contacts there anymore because I retired. So we're here today to talk about these 3 books, which are fiction. So message to all of the viewers, go back and get Caitlyn's true crime books because they're fabulous. And I've read, oh my God, 10 at least.
I've got at least a dozen.
Yeah, I think I've read them all. So, including the last one, which just had me wanting to throw the book across the room with that judge and those lawyers. I mean, it was so awful. Make sure I have the title correctly, Down to the Bone.
Down to the bone. In fact, here I have the cover. Let me just show it really quick because I need help with this book because I need help selling this book. Well, it's backwards, but Down to the Bone because, when it was delayed, publication was delayed 3 times and you lose marketing momentum when that happens. And so I have not been able to sell that as many books of that as I would like. It's also a hardcover. And with the price of gas and groceries, hardcovers are a little bit of a hard sell right now. So my other books are straight to paperback, and those ones are selling much better. And I was excited to have my first solo hardcover, but unfortunately, even the bookstores would tell me hardcovers are a hard sell right now. So it wasn't just my book. I wouldn't take it personally, but it's hard not to.
That's a fascinating story, and it's as an attorney, I was losing my mind with the trial, and
Me too.
anybody that likes true crime, you need to read it. So you know what? We should do another chat and just focus on that book.
That
We'll
would
do
be
that.
awesome. That would be awesome.
So let's talk about the fiction now. This is a prequel, but I am recommending to everyone, start with this book. And the reason I'm recommending this as a starting point is because of the main character, Ken Goode. And he is so fascinating, and this is a really good character study. You really get to know him. Plus, there's a reporter in there that you're just going to take into your heart. If you have any compassion in your heart, you are going to just be rooting for this guy. He wants so badly to be a reporter, and he gets his shot, and he's just hapless and adorable. So anyway, it's a great mystery at the center of it all. You got to start with this one, okay? Then you go on to Hooked, which I don't even know. We're going to have to talk about your plots. How do you come up with these plots? This is such a complex, multi-layered mystery. Now, this time she's got a reporter named Katrina Chopin, which I love. My piano's in the background.
Me too.
And she's, I know, we both play. She is another fascinating character. She's been an investigative reporter, gotten herself into a big jam, comes out to San Diego, starts working there, and who does she run into but Ken Goode? And now they're involved in this incredible mystery involving a new drug where the company is seeking FDA approval, and there's all kinds of shenanigans and murders and dead bodies, and I'm telling you, you're going to need to get a whiteboard and do like on the crime TV shows, which is something cops never really do, but anyway, and, you know how they get the string and all that nonsense on TV. I had one case in 1,000 years where somebody actually came in and we did a whiteboard, and it never ever happened again. But anyway, do that and get all your characters and draw all the lines because it's complicated, but it's so good. And now the new one picks up where that one left off. Ken Goode and Katrina are still on the trail. They solved some of the case. I would put it that way, right? In Hooked, but they're still dangling mysteries, and now they're on the trail of a murderer. I don't think it's a spoiler to say who died, right?
Well, okay, let me just say, the first book, there are two suspicious deaths, and so Ken Goode comes onto the scene and it's something's wrong with the scene because it's not clear whether it's a double suicide, a double murder, or a murder-suicide. And so he's kind of realizing something's funky with the scene, and it turns out that he thinks eventually somebody has messed with the scene, which is in fact true, and I don't want to give anything away, but it's basically these are two people who are involved in the company that is developing this new drug, which is a sexual enhancement drug, which I made up, and so which was really fun. And
don't try to go buy it, anybody, because it's not out there.
Yeah. So so it's a mystery who is responsible for these two deaths. And then when you get to the end of the book, you think you know, but when you get into staged, you realize that those suspects who were identified in the first book are just the tip of the iceberg, that it's actually a much bigger conspiracy cabal group going on behind these things, and that there are more deaths that are actually related, that are, it becomes a bigger and bigger ball of string. And my editor is reading book 3 right now, where this continues, where it just keeps getting bigger and bigger when you think you've solved it, but in fact there's still more that you didn't know, and you go deeper and deeper into the onion and see that there are more layers. And so book 3 continues. I really hope that she buys that one. And then I've also written a book 4 where that drug is finally approved and released to the public, and mayhem ensues.
Ooh, I can't wait. What I was alluding to was Katrina's personal angle.
Well, there's that too.
There's a murderer they're looking for. It has a very personal connection to Katrina. Right. And so she's very anxious to investigate that, along with what she's actually assigned to investigate.
Right. And I think it's okay to say, because it's in the prologue. So, and I bring it up in book 1, and that is the murder of her parents, who were federal judges. And her brother, her fraternal twin brother, supposedly died of an apparent overdose, suicide, but she always suspected that it was a murder and that it was somehow related to the murder of her parents. So she comes back to San Diego to kind of open up this cold case, and draws Ken Goode into it. So she's doing that on the side. They are investigating that on the side, as they are also investigating this cabal, and they start seeing some connections.
Yeah, exactly. And it's okay. So that reminds me, before I forget, because there are certain questions that viewers always want to have asked. All right, you must be a plotter as opposed to a pantser. Otherwise, I don't know, you'd be wandering in the forest somewhere.
Well, okay,
these are complex books.
So Naked Addiction, I did not plot anything. I did not outline anything. I didn't know where I was going. It was the first book I ever wrote. I rewrote it 1,000,000 times. It took 17 years to get published. Hooked was actually supposed to be part of a series with Naked Addiction as the first one, but it took so long for me to finish it. And I introduced this new character, Katrina Chopin, that it's now a new series. And so that's why I'm calling Naked Addiction the prequel, because it doesn't involve Katrina Chopin. And this is the Katrina and Goode series.
Right.
So what I learned from rewriting that 1,000,000 times, and then I rewrote Hooked 1,000,000 times also, was you have to plot. I needed to outline. And what I also learned is, even when I did outline, the ending still there weren't enough twists and turns. So I just kept adding more and more twists and turns. And I went back. One thing that I learned from Michael Connelly, he gave me a critique on Naked Addiction and helped me ultimately get it published by helping me fix the ending, because he said it was too obvious who my killer was. So I went back afterwards and I layered in a new killer. It was a character who had always been there, but it was too obvious that it was someone else. So I changed who the killer was, and it worked out much better. So now what I do that too now. So I'll write the first draft, and instead of rewriting the first chapter over and over again for 17 years, and then rewriting the first 100 pages, which is what I did with Naked Addiction, I just don't do that anymore. I write a first draft all the way through, and as I'm writing it, I have an outline, and sometimes I actually continue to add to the outline, because what I had originally thought of, I hadn't really thought through in enough detail, and I'll come up with maybe a better idea than I had to start with. And so it's kind of an organic document, my outline, but I'll use that as the skeleton of my book. In fact, when I do a nonfiction book, that's what I do. And I basically take my outline that I put in a book proposal, which is how you sell the idea to a publisher. I literally put that into my document, my Word file, and that becomes the book. And then I just rewrite it as I go. But with a fiction, I kind of feel like that puts me into corners sometimes. So I've kind of just left it as a separate document that I refer to now. And if I forget something, I'm like, oh yeah, that was a good idea that I never actually used, and I'll put it into the book and follow that. But sometimes they don't work out. On paper, you think something's going to work, and then you try it in the actual story, and it doesn't work. So what I do is I go out for a walk. I walk around the block. Maybe I walk around a bigger block, and I will, especially at the end of the day, after I've finished writing, I'll think about what I want to do the next day. And I'll come up with a whole bunch of new ideas and new twists and new turns and new layers. And I can go back and add some things that set that up. So that's kind of what I did with this complicated plot. And part of the reason why I just thought maybe my book wasn't interesting enough, Naked Addiction, because I couldn't get this sequel published. It took 19 years to get Hooked, the deal for Hooked. That's how many times I rewrote it.
I thought it was fascinating. And the way you got into Goode's psyche, I couldn't put it down. But
the thing is that Goode and I were closer to the same age when I originally started writing him. And so he's been in my brain for 35 years, and I'm not 37 anymore. So
none of us are.
So when I created Katrina Chopin, also, it was like 20 years difference, right? And when I have to write these spicy scenes, I have to just kind of go back in my memory, like what that was like when I was closer to that age, because I'm clearly not that young anymore.
Well, and for a moment, I want to touch on something because it's with the news this week. CBS 60, which I have boycotted CBS. I did that after Colbert went off the air. I went, well, that's where I'm done. So you have a note at the beginning of these books talking about why they are set in 2015. We all know what happened in 2015 in this country. I don't think we need to dwell on that. We sort of took a turn that none of us really saw coming. It involved an escalator. That's all I'm going to say. And you say that this is deliberate on your part. This is when we started seeing all these online newspapers and the print edition started dying. And most of us, I certainly grew up with every morning the paper was on the front porch.
Right. I do want to insert one thing, and that is this doesn't have anything to do with the election in 2016. I just want to make that clear. It's not a political choice. Okay. I just wanted to insert.
But I'm trying to set,
Yeah.
I think, how do I put it? 2015 for many of us is one of those dates. And that's where a lot of things started. And I think you and I can agree that we'd never heard this term fake news.
Oh, right. Yeah, definitely.
And all that stuff came after that.
Exactly.
So that's why I'm referencing that. Mm-hmm. And you said 2015 was before fake news evolved into misinformation and disinformation campaigns. And it was a time when communities relied on the media to print the truth and keep politicians honest, and on the police to keep us safe. Journalists were held to higher ethical standards, and people still believed in science and technology. Now, that's a pretty strong statement, and I know you have opinions. So do you want to weigh in a little bit about what's going on with the media right now? And not necessarily specifically CBS, but just in general. It's a different world than when you were in journalism.
Right. So let me put it in the context of the book and why this is important to my characters and how I wrote the book and why I said it in 2015. Because when I did that, I started writing Hooked in 2008 when this stuff was not even in our brain, right? But what was happening was the shrinking of the news industry. That was already happening. And so these forces have all kind of dovetailed, and things have just progressively gotten worse and worse for our access to information.
Right.
And when I was a reporter, the advertising side of the business was supposed to be separate from the news section. The opinion section was supposed to be separate from the news section. In fact, the editors in the Metro department, which is, the news department that I was in, they didn't even want the editorial editors to call the reporters. They had their own editorial writers who were supposed to go do their own reporting. We were not supposed to be mixing anything. They were supposed to be completely separate. So what you've seen over time was the kind of eroding of those boundaries until we've now gotten to the point where what's happening with CBS is quite a far place from what I had even envisioned when I was writing that introductory preface. When I wrote that, it was even before the ICE raids, when I was talking about the police we trusted to protect us. That has even eroded as well. The police were there to protect us. We trusted the police. This is before the raids. Do you remember what they called the riots in these various, when they were protesting various things? And the Trump administration was characterizing it as riots when in fact it was just protests, and they started tear gassing, protesters who were not violent. So that's where I was when I wrote that. That's where we were. And so it's gotten progressively worse for citizens who want to protest, and to the point where we now have these No Kings protests, which are enormous. And we didn't ever do that. We didn't feel the need to do that. We trusted journalists, and we stood up to, so I just did a Substack post about this because I worked for two family-owned newspapers which were regional newspapers. And so it was kind of happening in a microcosm, because when the family-owned newspapers, they're kind of the way that Trump treats media. You're there to satisfy the family who owns the newspaper because they're paying your bills. And so there were, they had an unwritten list of people at this one newspaper that I was back in Massachusetts. In the newsroom, we kind of learned this, that we would spend all our time on this investigative story or whatever, and it would get killed. And we'd be like, why was that story killed? Well, because you went after one of the owner publisher's friends.
Right.
Or business associates, and that's it. That was it. Well, we had some that also happened here in San Diego, and I have friends. I don't know that any of my stories were actually killed, but I had colleagues who had numerous stories killed because you'd go after a sacred cow in the community that they just didn't feel like you should go after. So where we are now is we have the government, basically meddling in the news business by I don't know if I should use this. I'll be careful how I say this because I don't want to end up getting targeted myself. But with these giant mergers involving Paramount, which is the parent company to CBS, there were apparently deals made between the owner and the administration that they needed to make it less liberal, and you needed to get rid of X, Y, and Z people or shows that were criticizing or not supporting enough of what the Trump administration wanted. And if he didn't like something that you said, or, he's just files these incredibly ridiculous amounts of money. And some of these news networks are giving in because their parent companies have these giant merger deals pending, and they are hoping that if they just do what they're told and pay this money, that their deal will go through. And so that's what's happening at CBS.
Yep.
So, so Colbert is gone. He even said, the money that CBS paid to the Trump administration, I think it was $16 million, was essentially a bribe. That's what he called it. Yeah. And they told him like the next day that his show was off the air. So
he was very vocal. He said it's big fat bribe. That's what it was.
Right.
And I was watching when he did it because I watched him every night.
Right. And then Jimmy Kimmel, they tried to do it to him, but there was just such an uproar. That's at ABC, right? Where they also had another one of those payments, right? And anyway, so this keeps happening, and he's just trying to take control over and get involved in business, where he has no business. The media is supposed to be independent. The media is supposed to be watchdogging government. They are supposed to be separate. I mean, but Trump does this within his own government with the DOJ. The DOJ is not supposed to be his personal attorney. It's supposed to be the attorney for the people. So he doesn't understand boundaries. He never has. And he's got people in his administration who just buy into that philosophy, and it's affecting everything in our country at every level. And all people can do, all reporters can do, it's like Scott Pelley, he quit. He essentially said things which he knew would get him fired. So to me, it's more like he quit, but he did he forced this issue, and then they fired him. And so, because he stood up to them and said, this is bullshit, essentially.
Well, I listened to the recording of the meeting in which she spoke up, because it's online. You can listen to it.
Well, we pretty much had a transcript of it every time there's a story. So
yeah. And you could hear it in his voice. You could hear the absolute emotion and frustration because, he is old school.
And that's what my character is. My character is an old school reporter. And so this series I said in 2015 as an homage to people like Scott Pelley.
Right.
Where we believe in integrity, we believe in ethics. And so Katrina and Goode can't date because there is a boundary that people today in government do not acknowledge or respect. Those boundaries exist. They still should exist. They still do exist, but these people are ignoring those things. I do not. My characters do not. And I just felt it was better to set it back then when everybody was more attuned to those boundaries and respected them than they do now. So that's very important as context for for the time and for the plot and what happens between the characters, the dynamic between the characters.
Right, because they are working together on these investigations, and they do share some information. But there are many times in the books, though, when they make it very clear we're off the record, and sometimes Goode will say to her, "Please don't go chasing that witness yet, because I need to interview them," or whatever the case may be, which falls within the boundaries of a relationship where there's mutual cooperation. But they're both, throughout all of these books, they're very mindful of the line. And I like the fact that Katrina, as you said, she goes to her editors and goes, "No, I'm not going to let you muzzle me," and stands up to the owner of the newspaper, which we won't go at. There's a whole bunch of twists involving that guy. But, again, she's got her head on straight with the sense of what her job is.
And the difference between right and wrong. And now I love the Vincent Bottrell character because he embodies all of these forces against them and against boundaries and against lines and against ethics and against all that. He is one of these old school guys who has a family. It's his family. He owns the paper. Right. And those people feel like they own and control what should be in the news pages. And Katrina stands up to her editors, and her editors, if there's one editor who is higher up and she's friends with the family and she's got this pressure where she feels like she has to comply, or she's like, "Do you want to lose your job? Do you want us all to lose our jobs?" And that's how it is. That's how it was at those two papers that I worked at. And that's real. And those forces have always existed. Yeah. But now, and in fact, I just got a note from a reader who said it's still really bad at small papers like that. But this is now happening to national networks. That is something new. That's different. That I didn't see. It was
always sort of a small town thing. I know growing up here, it was a family-owned paper, and there used to be a joke around town. You'd hear somebody got arrested, and we'd laugh because you'd say, "Well, you're never going to see that in the arrest report in the paper because they hang out downtown at the bar with so-and-so and so-and-so," and sure enough, because the paper used to have all the social pages and then births and deaths and who was arrested and all of it. And we knew darn well the guy was sitting in the county jail, his name's not in the paper. So, but it was never on this scale, and it wasn't like the information wasn't readily available to people because, hello, we all knew where he was. And then they'd eventually have to cover if there was a trial or something. They couldn't go that far, right? But anyway, so you've got book 3 and 4 now. Are they scheduled to be published with Thomas and Mercer, or are you waiting to hear?
I have submitted book 3. I tried submitting book 3 and 4 back last year, but they said it's too early for us to consider anything because book 1 hasn't even come out yet. They're very, very concerned with numbers and data. They call it data. So there's a number of different types of numbers that go into these decisions that I am not a party to and have not really gotten them to define them for me specifically. Or what are the metrics, and it's kind of like a secret, I think, that they don't want to tell you exactly, but they just say, we don't have enough data yet. So I resubmitted book 3 in January. I was told that again. And so finally now my editor got promoted and her boss is now my editor. She is now reading book 3 and will make that decision. We'll see about book 4, but probably not for a while because I think they just want to do one at a time. However, I have written yet another novel, which would be the start of a separate series, also set in La Jolla, because that's where I'm from and it's fun to write about La Jolla, about a cult. And anyway, it's really fun. And she's reading that one too. So I'm hoping she will buy one or both of those.
Okay.
And then, so I am now working on a sequel to the one that I just wrote about the cult.
And what about the true crime now? Are you out of the true crime business, or do you have something that because usually it's something tricky?
I have tried several times different cases to put together or start working on a case on a new book, and none of them have worked out for different reasons. One of them was about a woman who was convicted of murder here locally, and she was much later acquitted, which I thought was pretty interesting. But she, I think, decided to work with another writer. So I tried. That didn't work out. I tried, you know. I thought that would have been a really interesting follow-up to Down to the Bone. And the Rebecca Zahau case, Death on Ocean Boulevard. So those two were both kind of more going towards social justice, wrongful convictions, flawed investigations by law enforcement, et cetera, kind of moving in that direction. And so that would have been a fun follow-up. I found another book, another case that I was interested in, which I still haven't completely given up on, but I just couldn't get the cooperation I needed. I really tried. I talked to the lawyer, thought it was going to work out, talked to the victim's family, thought it was going to work out, and they just stopped returning my calls and emails. And it's just hard these days, honestly. I think there's just too much going on in the world that people just...
Yeah.
And then there was a third one, which I thought I was going to do, and I went to the first day of the trial, and I was just like, it's just not enough. It's just it's not grabbing me the way it needs to grab me. I just don't think it's meaty enough, and I'm not interested enough to stick with this for a number of years. I'm not sure it would sell outside of San Diego. So that's where I am with that. I have not given up on it, but like I said, I've tried. It's just so much harder these days to write true crime for logistical reasons, financial reasons. And honestly, Down to the Bone was a very, very difficult project for me for a number of reasons. And it, you know, like I said, it got delayed 3 times, and it's just been... So I'm really enjoying writing the fiction right now. That's what I'm doing. That's where I'm putting my energy.
Well, and that's what you always wanted to write.
And apparently that's what I always wanted to write, so it's okay anyway.
Yeah, because when you did your guest post, which I will link in our post on Instagram, I want everybody to go read about your journey, because I was shocked when I had no idea, having read your books all these years, and then to read how difficult it had been to transition into fiction, which is actually where you started, you know, with book number 1. I was like, wow. I mean, you are a walking case of perseverance.
Thank you. Naked Addiction was the first book I ever wrote.
Yeah.
A million times. And I couldn't get it published. So I said, why am I banging my head against the wall? Why don't I do what I've been doing professionally for 20 years? And that's, you know, writing nonfiction journalism. Why don't I try writing a nonfiction book? And so I went and did a proposal, and boom, that was the best-selling book that I've ever had. Poisoned Love is how it all started, with the Kristen Rossum case. That's one of my favorites. And
that's a great book.
Thanks. So that was my first book, but it's because I couldn't get Naked Addiction published. I really, really wanted to be a crime novelist. And, you know, for practical reasons, I ended up being a true crime. And then I really enjoyed that too, actually. I mean, as it turned out, I really love the research. I love the research. And I kind of miss that sometimes when I'm writing the fiction, because I still have to do research though. Like right now, I'm thinking about the sequel to this book about the cult. And I'm having to do research. I just interviewed somebody last night that I met at a book talk, who's a friend of the author who was giving the talk, and we started talking. She's a therapist, and so we, you know, I'm looking into child sociopaths, and I know some.
Wow.
I was a psychology major at Berkeley, so I mean, I know, and I'm interested in this stuff anyway. So I'm always reading about this and that. So I just got 2 books from the library: Sociopath and Confessions of a Sociopath. And I'm trying to figure out how this is going to work, and how am I going to stomach this, because I don't like writing about murders of children. I don't like writing about super bad, like writing about really bad children. Kind of, I don't know if I can stomach that. So I kind of was thinking, how am I going to do this so it doesn't upset me to write a book about, because I'm a very sensitive person. I absorb some of this stuff into me. I don't want to write a book that I wouldn't want to read, you know, and I don't want to write a book that is going to like affect me physically and mentally as I'm getting into these people's heads, which are just feel evil, even though I don't really believe in evil. I mean, being a sociopath is really a mental condition. Honestly, you're missing, I've learned that it is in part genetic, or can be, and so it's also, your environment. And so this is the tricky part that I'm trying to plot out. How can I make this happen? Because if some of these people who passed on the genes are gone, how environmentally is that child going to be influenced? Because it's not based on genetics alone.
Right.
So anyway, this is what I'm learning, and this is the research that I'm getting into. And it's fascinating, so I'm enjoying that. And it's for fiction, but I still get to research, so that's fun. And I also kind of feel like I had a purpose when I was writing true crime, because I was writing about things and issues that I felt were important, especially down to the bone. Flawed investigations, and the prosecution was following.
That book makes me crazy.
The prosecution was following these timelines that had giant holes in them, and discrepancies and conflicts. And I'm like, how do you ethically, live with yourself when you're putting on a case that is like has all those holes and conflicts in them? And do you really believe that? And so it was disturbing for me too. Like, how is our justice system so broken that we end up having a case like this?
Well, weren't those attorneys disciplined? Because they should have been.
The judge basically said, I am not going to do anything about this. I'm going to leave it to another court. That's what, and even though the defense attorneys brought it up a million times, prosecutorial misconduct, they never had a hearing. And the prosecutors were demanding a hearing because they felt like they wanted to defend themselves against these allegations. So the judge just abdicated his entire responsibility in that vein. And that was upsetting as well.
Well, and spoiler alert, there's someone sitting in prison right now, and there's, as far as I'm concerned, a lot of questions about whether or not that individual belongs there. Because
right, yes. I did not take a position because I don't know, but yes.
So if you guys want to read, I don't have a physical copy. You have yours. I would recommend to anybody that likes true crime and a real baffling mystery, this is a great book for you. But it will make you want to throw it across the room, so have a glass of wine to keep your nerves, or, your favorite beverage, or, eat a gummy or something, because I can feel my blood pressure rising when these objections are just being overruled and evidence is coming in that has no business coming. There's no foundation for it. I was like losing my mind. Anyway, so readers also want to know what writers are reading. So you just went and got 2 books about sociopaths.
Well, okay. So this is how I operate. I read my own book so many times that's all I have time to read. Honestly, when I'm writing a book, I don't have time to read other books unless it's for research. And like I said, I am now writing and plotting, a new novel. I'm doing reading, and I'm torn because I have a book that I'm supposed to be reading to write a blurb, and I'm like feeling guilty if I work on my own book because I know that this poor woman is waiting for my blurb, and I've had to read it on my phone in little tiny print, and it's very difficult. You only have so many hours that your eyes can read and your brain can focus, right? So
I know, believe me.
I'm sitting here staring at these sociopath books, which I want to read, but I haven't let myself because I know I need to read this other thing. And I've had some other issues, personal issues that I've had to deal with that I haven't been able to do any of it. So to be honest, there may be a little bit of time in between books, which I don't let myself have much time between books, where I will read other authors' books, but I don't have that much time. And when I do, it's often because I have to read them for a blurb. So I'm not reading them because I choose them. I'm reading them because somebody's asked me to do them a favor. So I can tell you, though, there was one book I read recently, which I did really enjoy.
Okay.
It was by Eric Beetner. And it was the 3rd book in his series, and I honestly don't remember the name of it, but if you look up Eric Beetner and his latest series, I found it to be very kind of quietly powerful.
Okay.
By Eric Beetner, Beetner.
Okay, we can look it up that way.
I made it halfway through a Hank Phillippe Ryan book.
Oh, yeah, she's great.
And then I stopped because I felt like it was getting really repetitive. And I've started reading some other books by big name authors that I didn't get very far into and thought, these characters are like cartoons and I don't really want to read this. And then I read a book by another really big author, which is who I had read before and who I would say inspired me to write such a complicated thriller with all those layers, because that's what he did, and he's a very, very big name. I read one of his books recently, and that was the one where I felt like the characters were like cartoons, and it was very violent, and I just didn't like it. So those are not books that I would want to recommend, even though I have read them.
Okay.
But I'm reading thrillers to make sure I, can keep improving and keep learning. So I am reading other books, but I'm a pretty tough critic.
Okay. Well, that's fair, and not every book is for every reader.
Right.
And
I wish I had. The one thing I have to say about Hank Phillippi Ryan is I actually made it all the way to, I don't know, I'm at least halfway through, where I didn't sit there and critique everything all the way through, like I was carried by the story. But then I started feeling like the editor in my brain coming back in and going, I feel like this has gone on for too long, and now I'm kind of getting bored with this plot. So I wish I hadn't said her name, but.
Well, like I said, everybody gets to read.
She's a very nice woman. She's a very nice woman, and we have a lot of background in common, and I know she's a very big name, but what I have found is sometimes they become formulaic, these books, by these big authors. I don't know, they just churn them out and write them quickly. I don't know.
Well, again, if you're not enjoying it, don't finish it.
Michael Connelly. I always like Michael Connelly.
I'm not happy with the Lincoln Lawyer series on Netflix, though. I turned it off. I love his books, but the series I thought was not well produced at all.
Kind of inconsistent. Like the first season I thought was great, and then I don't know, it was the second or the third. I was like, and then the fourth one was good.
Okay.
But anyway,
I finished the first season. I think was I in the second season when I said, no, I can't do this? It was unrealistic was my problem from a legal perspective. See, I'm a terrible critic. If you give me legal thrillers,
right?
I will just go, what was that TV show? Viola Davis. How
something to murder. I know what you mean.
I lasted like 20 minutes and I went, this is not going to happen in real life. This is stupid. Goodbye.
It was a soap opera kind of a thing.
It was just awful. Yeah, I couldn't do it.
So this is why I have specialized beta readers read my book, because I do not want them to have the reaction that you just had. I do not want them to go, this would never happen. I don't want that. So I want my characters to be believable. I want them to be accurate, and I want them to be compelling. And that's tricky because, people are like, okay, so the book that I just wrote about the cult, I gave it to a therapist to read, and she got very nitpicky about, personality traits and this and that. And I'm just like, this is not the DSM-5. This is a commercial fiction book. And so I definitely don't want them to go, oh, this would never happen. But I also don't want it to be boring, and follow every little textbook thing. And, because most people don't even know those things exist, and they aren't going to suspect or think that anything's weird about this character. If you're a therapist and you've studied personality traits of cult leaders, maybe this person is not exactly factually correct in terms of everything that you've ever read. But I've spent 2 years researching and writing a book on Charles Manson, and I feel kind of an expert in that area myself. So I felt pretty comfortable with the character I created, whether or not that person approved of everything that I had them doing. But it was good to hear what she had to say, and then I just decided on my own which parts of things I was going to take and which parts I was going to leave on the table in terms of feedback.
Too much detail can bog down a book. And, listen, people who are non-lawyers would read a lot of books that I read and go, oh, okay. And it would never occur to them that something in there is inaccurate. It depends on your level of expertise on a subject. Like there's a lot of stuff I'm sure I read in, medical or whatever, and people go, no, but I don't know. So it's entertaining me, and that's all I care about is I want to be entertained.
Right. So I had another beta reader who was a former prosecutor of sexual assault head of the entire division, and I wanted to know, do I have the protocols right? Would this happen in this situation? And she helped me with that. She's also, also a lawyer, and she can tell me about other laws and whether I got this and right and that right. That was very helpful because I could make sure that it was believable and interesting. And she said, well, this probably isn't entirely factually the right exactly, but it was very entertaining, and it's a book, so it's okay. And I just kind of went with it. And so she gives me that kind of feedback, which I appreciate, so I know exactly where I stand, and if I want to make a change, I can, or I can just let it go. And so so I do that because I do not want people to go, that could never happen.
Right. That's like, just a quick funny story. There was a show called Prison Break a number of years ago, and my kids and I watched it, and it was very entertaining. But it was such a silly premise, that he had the whole, he had the tattoo on his body and blah, blah, blah. And, at the time I was with the Department of Fair Employment and Housing, I think, doing civil rights work. And it was just entertaining, mindless kind of TV. And then they were going to reboot the show. So we decided we'd go back and watch some of the old episodes and reacquaint ourselves, right? So we started watching the first episode, and I went, I can't. Because by this time, where was I hanging out? San Quentin. And the whole idea that these people would miss a tattoo that was a schematic of the prison with the doors and everything on it. Like, first of all, where would you get that? Because that's private information, which I found out one time when I had an attorney show up at a hearing we were doing, and he had this map of San Quentin, and I went, give me that. And I got on the phone, and I called the warden, and I go, should this guy have this? And he goes, no. And I had to go in and tell the judge, I'm not giving this back to him. I want any copies he has in his office. This is, safety and security problems. And who gave you that? And he wouldn't tell me who gave it to him. But I said, don't try that again, and it was a whole big to-do, right? So I was like, that would never get through R&R when an inmate's coming in, right? And then this whole idea that they had a guy who was scheduled for execution, his brother, and he's just wandering around the yard, and he happens upon his brother who's housed in a completely different section, and they just sit out on the bench and chat. And I went, I'm not watching it.
So I have like a bunch of different beta readers who are, basically give me feedback from different aspects of law enforcement, so that I do not write books that would give you that kind of reaction. Yeah. And like I said, if I do keep something that's a little bit, then it's pretty borderline. Usually it's not going to be something egregious or completely unbelievable, because when you cross over, when you're writing crime fiction, I mean, there's certain things that I make up or I ignore that are true, but they've got to be pretty minor, I think, because otherwise people will know that it's wrong. Right. And even though it's fiction, it still has to, you still have to stay, you don't want people to give up like that. You want them to stay with the story. And if you keep throwing stuff at them that is not believable or that goes against the grain in some way, they're not going to enjoy your book. So
it has to be plausible at some level.
Or, or just really entertaining.
Yeah. Well, listen, I just love chatting with you today, and I think we're going to have to wrap up before Instagram throws us off.
Oh, okay.
But let's do this again, everybody. Okay. Naked Addiction is the prequel. This introduces you to Ken Goode. I'm telling you, if you love thrillers, you got to get this book. It's excellent. Thank you. Will prepare you for Hooked, where Ken Goode, he's a surfing detective. Now, come on. And Hollywood hasn't been calling about this?
Not yet.
Wow. These should be a miniseries, because I'm just trying to imagine who could play Ken Goode.
Well, when I wrote it originally, I was thinking about Ryan Gosling, but I think he's too old now.
Yeah.
But somebody liked it. So I thought about, what's that guy's name? I came up with somebody now, and I'm picturing him in my head, but he kind of does these rom-coms, and he's kind of sarcastic, and he's kind of got like brown hair, and he's thin, and he's kind of tall. What's his name? Oh God, I can't remember. It's very difficult because it has to be somebody smart.
Yes.
Smart and sarcastic and somebody with integrity. Yes. And he's so funny, but in a quiet way, like dry wit,
But he's got to be somebody physically that you can believe is a surfer.
And got to be in really good shape, yes.
Got to have the body for it. Yeah, which obviously, that eliminates me. Anyway, so Hooked is the next one, which is available now, and on June 16th, you'll be able to get Staged. And these, you really need to read these in order. I mean, you could enjoy them as standalones because you give enough of a summary. Like when I picked up Stage, I went, okay, yeah, okay. There was reminder information in there, which, you know, every series needs that. And so it's possible to just jump in. But for me, I like to start at the beginning of a series and go right through because I find that it's a richer experience if I get to know those authors at a, you know, a deeper level. But I'm just a geek that way. So, you know. Anyway, so I think we're going to reschedule another chat and we're going to come back and talk about true crime.
Okay.
Especially Down to the Bone, which again, I really highly recommend. And the one before that, I'm blanking. Is it Body Parts?
Body Parts I updated. So it was,
Yes.
I first did it in 2009 and I added 10,000 words, you know, 32 pages because there were new developments. And that is from genetic genealogy, they were able to identify his first victim who he dismembered and they never found her head. So what they had was frozen specimens of her DNA, which they were able to track down her family because one of her cousins had submitted his DNA to GED Match, which is the only one of these websites that gives permission to law enforcement to use the DNA to solve crimes.
Right.
And he did it specifically to try to hopefully find out whatever happened to his cousin, and it worked. So they were able to identify her.
I loved Down to the Bone, although it was infuriating, but I loved Body Parts. And because you had updated it, it's such an uplifting story. It's
strange to have a happy ending to a serial killer story.
Yes, and that's what I loved about it.
But her family has closure now, and they never knew what happened to her, and now they can finally have closure. And I thought that was so important. I interviewed her sister, and she was just like, "Thank you so much for your." Can I just tell you this quick story and then we'll go?
Yes. Yes.
Basically what happened was she got a call on her answering machine from a detective in Eureka, California, while she was still wondering what happened to her sister who had disappeared like 25 years earlier. And she quickly did a Google search and basically found my book before I updated it, the original thing, and she read it 3 times, and she read the description that he gave to the police about what she was like, and she's like, that was my sister. So she knew from reading my book before she even called back the detective that they had found her, that they finally had identified her sister. And then it turned out to be true. They took her DNA and then they confirmed.
Right.
She was happy. She was happy to finally find out.
Can you imagine? You know, they've never found the body of that woman here, Cindy, I think it's Vanderhuysen, is that who you said him? Her murderer is, you know, at San Quentin, Wesley Shermantine, and they've never found her body. And he wanted a book deal to tell where the body was. And then he wanted to go on a trip out there, you know, you just want to go on a bus ride, you know, come on. But of course, there's a law in California that you cannot profit from a crime.
Right.
And of course, Corrections was not about to go along with that. This was all in the news, so I'm not spilling anything here that's confidential. But that poor family, they've never found her remains.
Well, this trial that I started going to, this woman has never been found, and she's been missing now for 5 years, and her husband is on trial for her murder. So,
yeah, it's horrible. So, warning about your true crime books: they are not gory to the extent that they're going to be needlessly gruesome, but you know, it's crime, so we need to warn, you know, viewers and readers that
Body Parts and Hunting Charles Manson are really my only 2 books that have violence in them, because you can't ignore the truth.
No.
But my other books, I write about murder without really writing about murder. I just have they're psychological.
That's what I was just going to say. It's not graphic or what's the word I want? Exploitative for the you know, shock value.
Right.
There are just details that are necessary to understand the case. So if it's
do that.
a squeamish reader, you can still be okay. You just need to understand who these perpetrators are and their crimes and all that sort of stuff. And that's, I think, the fascinating part of it. And in Body Parts, the fascinating part is that it starts out with the guy confessing.
Right, and that's why I wrote the book. How many serial killers turn themselves in?
Nobody. Yeah.
And he wasn't on anybody's radar either. He didn't have to turn himself in. He chose to.
Right. So that's a whole, talk about a psychological study. That's another book that I just couldn't put down. I was up way too late, which is fine because I'm retired. I can sleep late. So anyway, all right. Well, this has been lovely.
It has been lovely. Thank you so much. We'll do this again sometime soon.
Yes, we'll get something on the calendar.
Okay.
And for those of you watching, watch my page because I have a whole bunch of author chats coming up. In fact, I have another one on Monday with Liz Lazarus. So be sure and come back and watch that one.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.